Starting off, we have the Elven Arrow. The Elven Arrowhead is a Type 1 arrowhead. This arrowhead actually looks pretty good. It's a light design like most Elven made things. The fletching is attached with a string and the feathers make for a pretty swift design. It's not going to be particularly great at penetrating armor, but I feel like it's good enough for the current state of Tamriel's armor. The Elven items are made out of moonstone, which is described as a yellow cream stone. It's very lightweight but sturdy enough to keep up with items like steel. This arrow gets a 10 out of 10. It's perfect and reflects High Elf society amazingly. The glass arrow is pretty bad. In some ways, it looks like a Type 4 arrowhead. However, the arrowhead is split like a Type 6 and is attached by 2 bars. This arrowhead wouldn't penetrate well at all. It somehow has to punch a hole in the middle where there is nothing to cut into the armor. Also, this arrow could very well just break on impact because its structural integrity is terrible. The arrowhead is just way too big. This arrow would be completely out of balance. The name glass is misleading, as the arrow is made out of refined malachite, which is green and slightly transparent, which is where it got the name glass from. Malachite in Skyrim is a pretty strong material, but I don't think it's strong enough to account for the terrible structural integrity. All in all, I give this arrow a 1 out of 10. It's actually a terrible arrow. Next up, we have the Ancient Nordic Arrow. The upper half of this arrow is a Type 3, but then it has this weird, almost decorative part under it that serves almost no purposes. The lower half has barbs, but the upper half is wider than where the barbs are, so they have no purpose. Now, one theory I have about this is that these arrows aren't meant to be used in a fight. You see, these arrows are found on the Draugr. Draugr were ancient Nords once and are found in burial crypts. In our world, warriors of old sometimes were buried with a sword or axe, or even pots and money. This is because they would believe that they took those items into their afterlife. This could be similar to the Draugr. The weapons they have on them could be burial gifts and mostly decorative instead of actually functional. The arrowhead itself is made from steel, and the fletching on this arrow is done with a string. I give the Ancient Nord Arrow a 6 out of 10. It's mostly decorative, but you could definitely kill someone with this. Getting into the first DLC arrow, we have the Nordic Arrow. The Nordic Arrow looks a lot like if someone took a spear and put some feathers on the end of it. That being said, it closely resembles the Type 2 arrowhead the most. I don't know why, but there are leather straps on the arrowhead. This could indicate that this is their way of fastening the arrowhead to the shaft. But since this is most likely an evolution of the Ancient Nordic Arrow, and they knew how to make arrows better than this, I think this is just decoration. This arrow would be good for hunting and for penetrating lighter armors. Against plate, this arrowhead would struggle. These arrows are made out of steel and quicksilver, which makes for a pretty sturdy arrow. The fletching looks good, and you can finally see that they stepped away from the fletching reaching behind the shaft. I give the Nordic Arrow a 9 out of 10. It's visually pleasing and has a really good design. Next up, we have the Riekling Spear. Yes, you can use a Riekling Spear as an arrow. The Rieklings are small, goblin-like creatures that are native to Solstheim and live in small tribes. Riekling society is very tribal, but also bears similarities to Orsimer culture. Strength is highly valued and the strongest is typically chief. The spears are used for melee and ranged combat and also their main weapon on bristleback. The first thing that immediately stands out is a lack of fletching, which makes sense. However, the game has accounted for this by giving the spear lower velocity and range, which is actually realistic. It does look like some arrowheads, but this isn't an actual arrow, so I don't think that's really fair. This spearhead is made out of steel, which would make it better than some arrows that are actually meant to be arrows. As an arrow, this gets a 3 out of 10, but as a whole, I love this, and it has a 10 out of 10 in my heart. The last Dragonborn DLC arrow is the Stalhrim Arrow. This arrow is actually pretty good. It's basically a Stone Age arrowhead mixed with actual good fletching work. The arrowhead itself isn't the best design, but Stalhrim isn't an easy metal to shape. Stalhrim is a rock-like material also known as enchanted ice. Lover Mallory, the blacksmith in Ravenrock, says this about Stalhrim. Calling Stalhrim an ore is like calling my forge a campfire. Some say it's enchanted ice, but I think there's more to it than that. Stalhrim can only be mined with an ancient Nordic pickaxe, which further drives the narrative that it's enchanted. Stalhrim is not smelted and is used in a state in which it is mined. Stalhrim weapons and armor are some of the strongest pieces you will find. The Stalhrim Arrow gets an 8 out of 10. It's really good, albeit a bit unreliable, due to the unsymmetrical nature of using a rock as an arrowhead. Starting off with the Dawnguard DLC, we have the Sun-Hallowed and the Blood-Cursed Elven Arrows. These arrows vary slightly from the regular Elven Arrow. The arrowhead glows either white or red depending on the variant. The feathers are black and white and are more round than the regular Elven Arrow. Other than that, everything is the same. These arrows have a unique effect when shot from Auriel's bow. If you shoot a sun-hallowed arrow from Auriel's bow, you will cause a small blast which deals sun damage. If you shoot a sun-hallowed arrow with Auriel's bow at the sun will shoot light beams down on all enemies and all allies, dealing sun damage. Doing the same with a blood-cursed arrow will cause the sun to darken, allowing vampires to walk around without the negative side effects they would normally suffer. Because these are mostly the same, these arrows still get a 10 out of 10 for me. The last DLC arrow is the Dragonbone Arrow. The entire arrow looks beautiful and is my personal favorite when talking about looks. The fletching on this arrow is actually good and the shape is still relevant to this day. Unfortunately, the arrowhead is pretty rough. 3 points means this arrow is basically useless against armor, as you would have to create a triangle shaped hole. Now, it could theoretically penetrate 3 small holes, but an arrow shot from a bow just doesn't have that kind of force. If this was any other material than Dragonbone or Daedric, then I think the points would break in half on most surfaces, as Dragonbone items are stronger than Daedric items. 3-pronged arrowheads do exist. I've seen a lot of 3-pronged modern arrows. These arrows would excel in curating wounds, but that's where the effectiveness basically stops. This arrow gets a 4 out of 10 for me. The arrowhead is just disappointing from an historical view. So that covers every single base game and DLC arrow in the game. My next project will likely be the crossbow bolts and the Creation Club content. I also want to check out the older games for some interesting arrows. I don't want my channel to be mainly centered around one subject. For example, I also just want to talk about lore alone. Thank you all for the overwhelming support in part 1 and 2. I appreciate it and have a wonderful day.